Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're decoding the high-stakes world of the UN's ultimate accountability mechanism. You know, when we think of the United Nations, we immediately picture global peacekeeping ops, massive cross-border humanitarian aid, and incredibly complex international diplomacy. The sheer scale is just staggering. But behind the scenes, far away from the cameras and the General Assembly speeches, there is this monumental, relentless effort required to keep that massive machine running. And it's not just about balancing budgets, it is absolutely crucial for safeguarding global trust. We're going to dive into exactly what it takes to audit the world.
We've organized this massive 50-point strategic document into a digestible, logical journey covering 6 key balancing acts. First, the ultimate global watchdog. Second, the Independence Balancing Act. Third, modernizing the audit trail. Fourth, oversight in the crossfire. Fifth, guarding the guards. And finally, number 6, the price of trust. So, who actually holds the United Nations accountable? It's kind of the fundamental question at the heart of global governance, isn't it? When an organization operates on a global scale with literally billions of dollars flowing through it and impacting millions of lives in some of the most remote, complex environments on Earth, the stakes are unimaginably high. Who audits the UN? Who makes sure critical funds aren't being diverted? Who verifies that tens of thousands of global staff are acting with absolute integrity? Well, that massive responsibility falls on one very specific institutional mechanism.
Let's start with Section 1, the ultimate global watchdog, safeguarding the United Nations. Let's pinpoint exactly who is doing this heavy lifting behind the scenes. The answer is the OIOS, the Office of Internal Oversight Services. This entity operates as an independent institutional safeguard, and its mandate is vast. We're talking about examining resources, staff conduct, governance structures, and overall performance across the entire UN system. The Undersecretary General leading the OIOS isn't just another bureaucratic administrator pushing paper around. They're the strategic steward of a high-trust oversight institution. Their job is, quite literally, to protect the credibility of the United Nations itself. Because think about it, if they fail, the entire system's legitimacy fractures. That's exactly why maintaining their independence is paramount to global operations.
They pull off this monumental task using 4 distinct methodologies, or pillars, that have to integrate seamlessly. First up, there's audit, which zeroes in heavily on controls and risk management. Then investigation, directly targeting misconduct and wrongdoing. Third is inspection, where they examine systemic structures to ensure compliance. And finally, evaluation, taking a step back to assess overall program effectiveness and impact. Now, these 4 pillars absolutely cannot operate in silos. They have to blend perfectly without losing their professional boundaries. For instance, a routine audit might uncover some financial discrepancies, right? That triggers a full investigation into misconduct, which could then reveal systemic flaws that demand a massive structural inspection. It's like a giant puzzle, allowing the UN to spot institutional patterns that a single isolated check would totally miss.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Independence Balancing Act, navigating tensions. This is where we hit the core paradox of the job. How do you investigate the very management you actually report to?
There is this massive, inherent tension between independence and isolation. On one side of the scale, the leader has to retain absolute authority to audit and investigate without undue influence. Obviously, you can't have executives interfering with probes into their own departments. But on the flip side, there's a very real risk of isolation. The leader has to be independent in their judgment, sure, but they can't become totally siloed from the rest of the UN's oversight ecosystem. They have to constantly coordinate with external bodies, like the Board of Auditors, and engage senior management constructively. Pulling that off, without ever compromising their strict objectivity, requires just an incredible level of organizational finesse.
And that finesse extends to a really hard boundary between providing advice and actually taking on management responsibility. The OIOS can proactively advise the Secretary General on institutional risks. They can point out fatal flaws in a supply chain or a broken procurement system, but, and this is key, they must remain entirely separate from executing the corrective management actions. They identify the problem, they advise leadership, but they cannot become responsible for fixing it. Because if the OIOS builds the new system, they completely lose the ability to impartially audit that very same system a year down the line. Keeping that strict separation is what keeps their future audits unbiased and their authority intact.
Navigating all those boundaries leads to a really profound reality. The role demands political acumen, but political acumen must never become political accommodation. I love that phrasing because it perfectly captures the intense diplomatic tightrope the oversight leader walks every single day. The job means communicating highly sensitive, often really difficult findings to powerful member states diplomatically. It requires a deep understanding of power dynamics, political timing, and geopolitical consequences. Yet, they have to do all of this without ever negotiating the facts or softening their conclusions just to avoid causing diplomatic discomfort. The truth remains the truth, no matter who it upsets.
Now, let's jump into Section 3, Modernizing the Audit Trail, the Digital Frontier, because technology is completely changing the game for global oversight. The golden rule here is that digital transformation must not create a black box. It actually has to increase traceability. The UN is leaning heavily into AI and data analytics for continuous forensic auditing and anomaly detection across these massive global datasets. And these technologies are incredible tools for spotting fraud or identifying risk instantly. But they also introduce monumental new vulnerabilities. If an algorithm is biased or if it mishandles highly sensitive confidential data from vulnerable populations, the damage could be catastrophic. Embracing tech is essential for sure, but it can't come at the cost of transparency. We literally need to be able to follow the breadcrumbs of how these digital tools arrive at their conclusions.
To make sure technology actually strengthens impartiality rather than weakening due process, the OIOS has to implement some strict AI safeguards. Step 1. Mandatory human review. Algorithms alone should never, ever make final ethical or investigative judgments. A human expert must always be in the loop. Step 2. Conducting rigorous bias testing. We have to ensure the systems aren't unfairly targeting specific regions or demographics. And Step 3. Establishing rock-solid privacy controls to protect sensitive information. Ultimately, these digital tools are meant to focus and elevate professional human judgment, not completely replace it. All right, moving to Section 4, Oversight in the Crossfire, into the field. Let's step out of the boardroom for a minute and look at how oversight functions when lives are literally on the line. Imagine trying to investigate a complex supply chain in an active war zone, or right in the middle of a massive, chaotic humanitarian crisis. Teams have to adapt their methods incredibly fast to the realities on the ground. When physical access is just too dangerous, they rely on remote evidence collection. They have to use highly secure field communications to protect whistleblowers in hostile regions. And importantly, they implement trauma-informed witness engagement. When you're interviewing someone who just survived a crisis, you can't use aggressive interrogation tactics. You need deep empathy. All the while, they're maintaining conflict-sensitive awareness, navigating host country sensitivities and severe security constraints without unnecessarily disrupting the critical, life-saving operations happening all around them.
And that brings us to this critical principle. Oversight must distinguish between acceptable risk-taking under emergency conditions and preventable failures. Now, while hindsight bias should absolutely be avoided during a chaotic crisis, an emergency is never a blanket excuse for outright fraud or abuse. The oversight has to be highly principled and proportionate. It means clearly telling the difference between a manager taking an acceptable, calculated operational risk to get food to starving people versus a systemic, completely preventable failure in basic financial controls. You don't punish someone for saving lives under pressure, but you also don't just look the other way when funds go missing.
Let's look inward for Section 5, Guarding the Guards, Internal Culture. Behind the mountains of data and all the rigorous audits, there is a deeply human element.
Think about it. Oversight leaders can't credibly demand transparency from the broader United Nations if they treat their own potential conflicts of interest casually, right? Internal culture is paramount to maintaining their legitimacy. That means enforcing strict conflict of interest screening for themselves at every single level. It requires robust protection from retaliation for anyone who speaks up and actively fostering a genuine speak-up culture within their own ranks. Because if the watchdog itself operates with conflicts, or if it silences internal dissent, the entire UN system loses its moral credibility. The OIOS's authority rests entirely on fiercely practicing what it preaches.
All of this builds into a really vital operational reality. Psychological safety is absolutely essential to sustain difficult oversight work without burnout. These teams constantly deal with deeply distressing instances of misconduct. They're operating in hostile field environments, managing high-pressure, incredibly confidential evidence. The sheer psychological toll of investigating global wrongdoing day in and day out is immense. Because of this, their psychological well-being isn't treated as some optional luxury. It's a strategic necessity. It's what ensures these investigators can remain objective, rigorous, and fearless over the long haul without burning out or becoming entirely cynical.
Finally, we reach Section 6, the price of trust. Concluding thoughts. Let's tie all these complex operational points back to the ultimate currency of the United Nations, public trust.
Trust is built not by hiding flaws, but by transparently identifying and correcting them. The greatest reputational risk to the UN isn't the simple existence of problems or operational weaknesses. Let's be honest, any massive global entity operating at this scale is going to have flaws. The true risk, the fatal risk, is the public perception that the organization is selectively ignoring those problems. When an organization sweeps its failures under the rug, the public notices. Honest, uncompromising, and transparent oversight is what actually strengthens global legitimacy in the long run. It proves the system is fully capable of self-correction.
So, if independent oversight is the immune system of global justice, what happens to world peace when we stop trusting the watchdog? It's a pretty sobering question to end on. Consider how the immense fragility of global accountability rests squarely on the shoulders of this delicate, brilliant balancing act. The next time you see the UN operating on the global stage, remember the immense, unseen machinery working relentlessly behind the scenes to keep it honest. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.